The awesome power of nature, at once beautiful and terrifying, benevolent and cruel, constantly changing, destroying and renewing its contours, the planet Earth makes no allowance for man. But of all the planet's great exhibitions of might, none is more powerful and fearsome than a volcano. On May 18, 1980, in Washington State, a volcano erupted with the shattering strength of a hydrogen bomb, flattening forests like kindling and searing the life out of 100 square miles of timberland. The gigantic blast sent a cloud of black ash around the world and formed a lethal river of mud that smothered everything in its path. This is the story of the eruption of Mount St. Helens, of the Earth's terrible power and man's valiant attempts to adapt and learn from it, of the tragedy of its victims and the triumph of those who survived, and of a continuing threat still as frightening and unpredictable as ever before. Through it all, ABC News was there. Watch now the original ABC News broadcasts of a great TV news story, Volcano, the eruption of Mount St. Helens. From ABC News, great TV news stories with Ted Koppel, Sam Donaldson, Frank Reynolds, Max Robinson, Tom Jarrell, Hugh Downs, and the worldwide resources of ABC News.
That suddenly live crater at Mount St. Helens in Washington State produced an extraordinary outpouring of smoke and ash today. From a distance, it was an awesome and strangely beautiful sight. But up close was something else. Tom Schell has more.
The eruptions of Mount St. Helens are becoming more intense, apparently building toward a major event. This one this morning was exceptionally violent, and volcanologists are excited.
It's impossible to predict, but one can have a personal hunch. And things are, as I said, are looking as though we're having a kind of build-up towards some perhaps impressive phenomena. The power of the eruption, I thought, was extremely impressive. It looked as though the crater were being enlarged, and that's been growing steadily. And as I said, the gas and steam plumes were surging out with great violence, which indicates there's a lot of pressure from below.
Geologists are being cautious about making any prediction about a major eruption. The volcanic ash is being blown in the direction of Portland, Oregon, 35 miles away. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
That Mount St. Helens volcano in Washington State was shaking and puffing today, but so far producing only steam and ash. However, Tom Schell reports that could all change very soon.
Mount St. Helens is erupting with more frequency now. Scientists still say the volcano is clearing its throat, but changes in seismic readings indicate lava may start coming from the mountain soon. The spectacle is acting like a magnet, drawing tourists by the hundreds to southern Washington. Officials are now concerned that the influx of tourists will cause major problems in the event it's necessary to evacuate the scientists who are studying the volcano.
An example, yesterday we were attempting to respond to the scientist community to provide access into some instrumentation area. We had to get the lieutenant of the State Patrol to provide escort for one of our motor patrol graders. If we can't get in to do these routine type things, it would be extremely difficult to respond in an emergency.
To satisfy the curious, special viewing areas are being established some 20 miles from the volcano. Mount St. Helens is not one to disappoint. As frequently as once an hour, she coughs and belches and sends forth the columns of ash and steam. The mountain is now 6 feet shorter than it was a week ago, and the eruptions are continuing to blast away the top of the cone. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
A weekend of calm at the Mount St. Helens volcano in Washington State gave way today to new and potentially serious rumblings. Tom Schell is there.
Mount St. Helens was visible for the first time in 2 days this morning, and geologists say that she is erupting more violently now. This eruption began with just a small puff of steam, but quickly grew.
Probably in a sequence of eruptions, more energy is being released over the sequence, and we seem to be going through sort of a period of more, and then less, and then a little bit more eruptive activity.
Dr. Benson watched this videotape of the eruption, and his excitement grew. Watch the center of the picture.
You see large objects. Well, oh boy, wow. Now, those are large objects, say, the size of small Volkswagens or something like that, that are you don't want to run into.
Seismograph readings and analysis of infrared pictures taken by a U-2 aircraft indicate lava is moving close to the top. Geologists say that a sheet of paper listing all of the earthquakes that have occurred here in the past 2 weeks would cover a football field. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
Most of the residents around the base of Mount St. Helens have already been evacuated, but a few have refused to leave, including 84-year-old Harry Truman, who says the earthquake preceding this morning's eruption was the strongest he's felt so far. Truman, who is not related to the former president but is just as feisty, says he's lived here 54 years and is not about to leave. He's got enough bourbon and coke and food, he says, to stick it out a long time.
If I left, it'd kill me. If I left this place and lost my home, I'd die in a week. I couldn't live. I couldn't stand it. So I'm like that old captain. By God, I'm going down the ship.
But other residents aren't as fearless. Some have been evacuated to the tiny town of Cougar, about 13 miles from the crater. Debbie Grossi says the experience has been terrifying.
I'm just afraid that, it's really going to erupt, and, then my things will be gone. It's really a scary thing.
Mount St. Helens, for 123 years it was dormant, but today the volcano exploded with a powerful force that turned daylight to dark. Tonight, the death toll from the explosion has reached at least 7. Tom Schell reports.
Mount St. Helens literally blew her top this morning and has been belching smoke and ash ever since. There are unconfirmed reports of lava flowing on the mountain. The volcano was over 9,700 feet high, but lost an estimated 700 feet today. At least 5 people have been killed and many others are missing. The smoke and ash is covering a wide area of the Pacific Northwest, as we can see in this infrared satellite photo. The cloud of ash extends from Mount St. Helens eastward across the Idaho Panhandle into Montana. In Yakima, Washington this morning, 85 miles north of Mount St. Helens, it was like midnight. Streetlights came on automatically and many cars stalled when the ash clogged carburetors. Walls of mud slid into the Toutle River, sending a 20-foot-high torrent of water rushing downstream. A Weyerhaeuser logging camp was wiped out and the logs swept downriver. The debris took out one bridge and forced the closing of the Interstate 5 bridge for several hours. It is feared that some people could have been swept away by the floodwaters, but the 5 confirmed deaths were blamed on the heavy ash and the sulfuric gases that poured out of the volcano. A team from National Geographic reported from the north side of the volcano that Spirit Lake appeared to be boiling and the Spirit Lake Lodge was flattened. That's the home of Harry Truman, the 83-year-old caretaker who has refused to leave the mountain. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington. This is how Mount St. Helens looked 2 days before it began erupting, March 27th, a volcano that had been sleeping for 123 years. And this is Mount St. Helens today, after yesterday's massive eruption that blew away 1,200 feet of the top. The thundering explosion was heard 200 miles away and sent tons of mud and molten glass tumbling into the Toutle River. 4 separate walls of water swept downstream, wiping out scores of homes and some lumber camps. Today, the floodwaters are receding and exposing much of the damage that was hidden by the high waters. Near the mouth of the Toutle River, a strange phenomenon appeared this afternoon. It appears to be a steam vent that keeps the water roiling. National Guard and Air Force helicopters are flying search patterns along the valley, looking for the more than 20 persons listed as missing. Even as the search continues, people are still getting into trouble. This afternoon, this pickup truck was driven into mud that covers the highway along the Toutle River. But that's a minor problem. All along the riverbed, trucks and cars were tossed aside like worn-out toys. This was once a major lodging camp of the Weyerhaeuser Corporation. Homes and summer cottages that owners believed were safely tucked back in the forest that lines the river were crushed by the walls of water that hit with almost no warning. Mount St. Helens is still spewing steam and ash, and the ash continues to spread to the east. These are satellite photos, computer-enhanced. Pictures taken yesterday show a large gray area within the state of Washington. It is volcanic ash. As the cloud spreads to the east, it cools and gets lighter in color. Today's satellite photo shows how far the cloud is spread. The large gray area extends through Montana. In Yakima today, city officials said there is no special health hazard because it is volcanic ash, but people will still have some problems.
The main problems have been irritation of the nose and throat and coughing and sneezing. That is a normal physiologic reaction to any kind of dust in the air.
Mount St. Helens is relatively quiet tonight, but still has scientists guessing as to what she'll do next. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
That huge cloud of ash from the volcano is expected to sweep across the country over the next few days and have some effect on the nation's weather. One possibility is dirty rain. Another is brilliant sunrises and sunsets if the weather beneath the cloud is clear. Scientists say the ash could also have an impact on world weather patterns because the finer particles have been blown into the stratosphere by upper-level winds and could circle the globe for years.
More steam and ash spouted from the mountain today, but there was nothing like the massive eruption of 2 days ago. However, officials have now drastically revised their estimate of the death toll from Sunday's explosion. 6 persons are known dead, and late today, authorities said they believe nearly 100 are missing. The great cloud of ash from the volcano is now drifting across the Midwest and East, but not in sufficient density to cause serious problems. However, in parts of the Northwest, the impact of Mount St. Helens has been devastating. We have a series of reports tonight. First, here is Tom Schell.
Today, we got the first close-up look at Mount St. Helens since the massive eruption Sunday morning. This is the area that blew out. It is the slope that had been bulging for several days. The force of the blast flattened everything in its path. These logs were a forest until 8:30 a.m. Sunday. The landscape is almost colorless because of the heavy coating of volcanic ash. This is the bottom of the Toutle River, the water cut off by a 200-foot-high mud flow that acts as a natural dam. Scientists say the water will soon come over the dam, probably causing major flooding downstream. If the dam bursts, it could cause flooding at the towns of Kelso and Longview, Washington, 40 miles away, where 50,000 people live. Silt and mud that got into the Toutle River from the eruption has been carried into the Columbia River, making it too shallow for shipping. At least a dozen freighters are stranded in the ports of Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. Mount St. Helens is continuing to send up clouds of ash that are drifting to the east, dropping a heavy layer of ash over a large area. Tom Schell, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
A horrible-looking sight. That's the way President Carter described the area around Mount St. Helens today after an hour-long helicopter tour of the region. Mr. Carter said the devastation was worse than he expected to see and predicted it will take years to clean up the mess caused by last Sunday's eruption of the volcano.
It took a lot of helicopters to move the presidential party today. 5 small ones for the president and other VIPs, 3 large ones for the press and other hangers-on, flying by the scenes of devastation now so familiar to television viewers. The rivers clogged with mud and debris, the mountainside gashed and twisted, still steaming in places like some setting from the twilight of the gods. The timber burned and blown down, and even though low clouds kept the president from actually flying over the crater itself, he found it impressive enough.
I've never seen or heard of anything like this before. Somebody said it looked like a moonscape, but the moon looks like a golf course compared to what's up there. It is a horrible-looking sight.
In the small town of Kelso, Washington, the president visited a Red Cross evacuation center, praising the search party volunteers, saying a few words to people who've lost their homes and promising federal aid to the extent necessary. So awed did Mr. Carter seem by the volcano's damage that back in Portland, Oregon, he predicted it would become a sight generations to come would want to see.
When safe places are fixed for tourists and others and scientists to come in and observe it, I would say there would be if you'll excuse the expression, a tourist attraction that would, equal the Grand Canyon or something. It's an unbelievable sight.
This is Stephen Geer. These are some of the sights President Carter did not get to see this morning because of the cloud cover. In the early morning hours before the president's helicopter went into the area, a small maneuverable ABC News chopper flew under the clouds on the east side of the volcano. And for the first time, we saw fantastic scenes that might have been recorded by a space probe circling another planet. Sunday morning's gigantic explosion produced small fires that are still burning 4 days later, and we could feel the heat from the ash and watch the steam rising from vents in the desolate terrain. In this moonscape, we saw animal tracks made by elk or deer that had somehow survived the disaster, and astonishingly, one set of human footprints clearly visible in the still warm ash cover. Snow and rain were falling, and we saw that water is still draining down the mountainside despite the eruption. This waterfall splashing down through the ashes may not have existed before the explosion. This river flowing from Mount St. Helens is not the Toutle River we have seen so often in the past few days. It's the river called the Muddy. And the evidence is clear that after the eruption, a wall of water more than 20 feet high and 100 yards wide slashed through this riverbed, destroying this concrete bridge and carrying this heavy concrete slab from the bridge a quarter-mile downstream. We found footprints in the mud of this riverbank, a man, a woman, and a child evidently hoping to cross the river, but finding it impossible to go through the volcanic mud. Our pilot radioed the Forest Service, and a short time later, these rescue helicopters were taking off to begin searching for those who had made the footprints. For some, no search is needed. Our cameras recorded this tragic sight in the now dry bed of the Upper Toutle River late yesterday. Stephen Geer, ABC News, Portland, Oregon.
While rescue workers search for more victims of Mount St. Helens eruption, the volcano has started to rumble again. This latest activity comes at a time when the Pacific Northwest is still assessing the economic loss of Sunday's eruption. June Massell has been driving through the area.
Interstate 90 going west out of Spokane, Washington was closed today, as it has been every day since Mount St. Helens erupted. Emergency snowplows cleaned up the volcanic ash, now matted down by this morning's rain showers. Yesterday, before the rains, the ash created billowing clouds of dust, and on I-90, it looked as though a snowstorm had hit. In fact, the swirling dust was so bad that when it settled, the ground resembled the lunar surface. But today, the rain turned that volcanic dust to mud. In Sprague, Washington, a small agricultural community 40 miles west of Spokane, city crews were busy plowing and pushing mud. Residents swept mud off their rooftops, afraid the weight might cause them to cave in. All of this from 3 inches of volcanic ash that covers everything. It's even penetrated inside homes through windows and doors.
There's just no end to it. It comes in daily. You know, I don't know how we'll ever get it all clean.
The big worry for Sprague, however, is the water supply running out.
We have put the people on rationing. We don't want them using their water any more than absolutely necessary for health reasons until the electricity is back on.
Because of a power shortage, crews began working on the dead lines today so that more water could eventually be pumped into the reservoir, now only half full. June Massell, ABC News, Sprague, Washington.
Throughout recorded history, volcanic eruptions have inspired fear and fascination rarely matched by any other natural phenomenon. Among both primitive and civilized peoples, volcanic activity is well recorded and remembered. John Martin reports.
It is majestic and menacing all in the same moment. Molten rock and gases shooting out of vents in the earth. It is awesome. Energy escaping in amounts greater than the force unleashed by a thermonuclear explosion. Over the centuries, some 800 eruptions have killed perhaps 200,000 people. In 1902, 30,000 people died in this city on the island of Martinique, burned to death by fires set off in a surge of lava down the slopes of Mount Pelée. Thousands more died in the best-known volcanic eruption in history, the explosion of Mount Vesuvius in the year 79, sending a river of lava into the streets of Pompeii, engulfing and burying its citizens in their homes. Their bodies and their location were hidden under 20 feet of debris for 15 centuries.
But most of the world's eruptions take place on the other side of the globe. Geologists call this the Ring of Fire because 75% of the world's active volcanoes lie along and within the rim of the Pacific Ocean. From Indonesia and the Philippines and Japan up to the Aleutian Islands, down the side in the Cascade Range here, and down the coast of South America. Why so many volcanoes here? The answer seems to be cracks in the Earth's crust, which form plates that rub against each other. The volcanoes cluster along the edges of these plates.
This volcano erupted in Guadeloupe just 4 years ago. This volcano spilled ash into the streets of an Icelandic village in 1973. Raw, fiery beauty. The beauty of an elemental force unleashed from inside a fragile planet. John Martin, ABC News, New York.
By this evening, ash from the world's latest active volcano had drifted all the way to the east coast. Tonight's sunset over New Jersey and the Hudson River was just a little hazier than usual. Those New Yorkers who took the time to watch the sun go down this evening We're seeing it through a prism that was blasted into the atmosphere on the other side of the continent.
More than 5 days after the explosion of Mount St. Helens volcano, an explosion now being compared to the force of a hydrogen bomb blast. Helicopter crews flying in good and bad weather continued their intensive search for survivors, but today, as expected, they found more victims. The death toll now is 32. And in addition to the loss of life, there are new estimates of staggering costs in property damage and major economic problems for the affected area. We have 2 reports tonight. First, here is Stephen Geer.
All day long, the helicopters land and the helicopters take off from the volcano rescue headquarters at a small airfield in the little town of Toledo, Washington. And the death toll continues to rise. At mid-morning, another body was brought in. Many others have been sighted but not yet recovered. Cameras are being kept at a distance as the victims are brought in. In that tent is a temporary morgue, and FBI agents there are fingerprinting the dead so that identification will be certain. Officially, the chopper crews are searching for 88 missing persons, although the bodies of 17 of those 88 had been found when the day began.
It looks very slim chances we'll ever find 88 people, because there are some that are entombed in the country, like, for instance, probably Harry Truman.
Harry Truman is the mountaineer who had refused to leave his lodge at the edge of Spirit Lake. Today, Truman's home is buried at the far end of the lake. It's impossible to believe that anyone here could have survived. The volcano, obscured by clouds today, is relatively quiet, producing a small earthquake and a tall plume of steam. In this desolate area, rescuers found a scene of death and new life.
A couple that were with him were killed by tree falling. The tree fell on the dog. The dog has been pinned there since Sunday. When they removed the people from underneath the tree, they went over to remove the dog, and the dog was still alive and had pups in the interim.
Stephen Geer, ABC News, Portland, Oregon.
This is Royal Kennedy. The Mount St. Helens eruption was as destructive to the economic livelihood of this area as it was to the landscape. The lumber industry and men like Frank Reynolds, who work in it, will take the biggest losses. An independent logger, Reynolds and his crew have already lost 4 days of work. Volcanic ash covers everything in their camp, and Reynolds predicts that every time the weather is dry and the dust picks up, he will have to shut down his operation.
Truckers can't haul logs because of the dust, and loggers can't log because of it, and people are scared to go close to the mountain. There's a lot of problems.
It's estimated that enough lumber to build 200,000 homes was destroyed. Losses for the entire timber industry are estimated at $500 million. The commercial fishing industry will be hurt by the loss of millions of fish, killed when volcanic ash and steaming mudslides heated the water to over 90 degrees. Silt and debris from the volcano virtually closed the port of Portland this week. The Columbia River channel, normally 40 feet deep, was half filled and unpassable in some sections. The Army Corps of Engineers has begun dredging operations, but it will be at least July before the port is ready for normal traffic. Royal Kennedy, ABC News, Portland.
Good evening. A new plume of ash rising 45,000 feet and pulsing at 10-minute intervals like a steam engine. That is the description of today's major eruption of the volcano Mount St. Helens. It was the biggest blast in a week of a series of volcanic activity which experts now say could continue for several years. The latest from Royal Kennedy.
Because of blowing ash from this morning's eruption, motorists were warned to stay off the roads. Some of those who didn't heed the warning were involved in this 14-car pileup on Interstate 5. 20 people were injured, 2 of them seriously. Earlier in the day, driving conditions were just as bad when the ash combined with rain in a smoky mud. Motorists were forced to stop periodically and hose down their cars.
The major area of ash deposit appears.
Many drivers turned on their car radios to get information about the current emergency and the long-term health effects of the ash.
Bob Jacobson of the Environmental Protection Agency says the EPA is worried about very small particles of ash.
Those particulates, if a person is subjected to heavy or prolonged exposure, can produce illness such as emphysema, acute bronchitis, or other respiratory diseases.
In Longview, Washington, the ash storm not only blocked out the daylight, but left the city totally without power. The ash is also threatening the city's water supply and residents are being asked to use as little water as possible. Geologists say this morning's eruption is just a continuation of yesterday's activity on Mount St. Helens. They say it did not rearrange the surface of the land and was not as dangerous as last week's blast. But they point out that ash from volcanic eruptions is something the people of this area will have to live with for years to come.
Standing on the landing gear of the helicopter, ABC News cameraman Tony Gonzalez photographed the headwaters of the Toutle River this morning, and he reports that the layer of ash is much heavier since last weekend's eruption. Our chopper was climbing toward the peak of Mount St. Helens, and here, looking toward the rising sun, we see the rim of the crater. Directly over the crater, the plume of steam and ash. Only a light dusting of ash fell on our helicopter inside the crater. 2 earthquakes rattled the mountain this morning following yesterday's tremors, which indicated the movement of molten rock within the mountain. Search teams were out in force today after being called off because of the tremors. Unknown is the significance of this morning's quakes, 4 and 3/8 on the Richter scale, which were centered under Mount Margaret, 10 miles north. Mount St. Helens is relatively quiet for the moment. Stephen Geer, ABC News, Portland, Oregon.
ABC News correspondent Steve Fox and 2020 cameraman Bob Brandon and soundman Phil Lauter are the first network news people to have set foot on the mountain itself since the eruption. Steve and the crew spent 2 days last week with a search and rescue team.
The danger area is from the mountain to just north of Spirit Lake.
Because they don't even know for sure they're in there. If they can get me a vehicle here, I'll put a ground party in.
They plan. They talk. They calculate every risk as they work grueling hours to battle the disaster. Using every means of communication, local officials and active Army troops share information, their most valuable weapon in the assault on Mount St. Helens. Deputy Sheriff Mike Koppenheffer leads the combined forces on search and rescue missions for possible survivors of the eruption.
If we get a confirmed missing on a vehicle, we're going to get a ground crew in with support with the helicopters. Whether we fly them in or drive them in, depending on the weather.
Sheriff Sergeant Randy Hamilton instructs local volunteers in emergency search and rescue. He says the results have been especially rewarding on Mount St. Helens' rugged terrain.
A successful mission is when you find what you're after. And I think the personal pride involved is being able to work with the volunteers. Seeing volunteers come out that you know that work at the bank during the day or work at a mill or run a farm, that when you call them, they come.
They come here to a nearby village firehouse, anxious to help friends, relatives, and neighbors. The volunteers and regular Army helicopter crews drop other responsibilities to concentrate on the rescue effort. Each morning, women from the community prepare donated food for everyone, including Hauser, the German Shepherd tracker who will travel with the rescue team. There are 50 Army troops here and 20 civilian volunteers. The mood is one of cooperation, not competition.
The camaraderie is wonderful. And I think the Army men know that our men know the roads, know the area like the back of their hand. They're taking the risk because they hope maybe they might find someone still alive, holed up somewhere up there. And of course, all the bodies have to be brought out too, for families.
Those of you that haven't been in there and haven't seen it, the devastation is just something we're not going to be able to explain to you. You're going to have to see it to believe it.
The final briefing just before the mission to the mountain. The men get disturbing news. There's more risk than usual. A 5-foot-high volcanic bulge has appeared near the site of today's search, a mining camp where 3 people are missing. Army pilot and Vietnam veteran Russell Capps, who has logged more than 3,600 hours flying helicopters, can only warn his men, not prepare them, for what might happen if there's another eruption.
If it does blow, you can expect large rocks, of course, ash clouds, and a speed of 100 to 200 miles an hour.
A farmer's field is the temporary landing strip for the helicopters. It's the last bit of familiar ground the searchers will see for a while. The men take along survival kits. They may be trapped on the mountain overnight, as one helicopter crew was the night before. Deputy Sheriff Brian Hill is Hauser's partner. Hill has trained the dog for 2 years. Hauser's learned how to track down human beings, dead or alive. The helicopter pilots are from Fort Lewis, Washington. This kind of flying is not unusual for them. All of them have been trained to fly behind enemy lines and pluck out wounded soldiers. The convoy of 4 helicopters flies toward the mountain. The search and rescue team on board one, local lawmen and our camera crew on another, plus some smaller choppers to act as aerial scouts in the attempt to locate the missing family. The pilots stay in constant contact with the ground base as they head toward the search area. First, we fly over the lush green forests and clear lakes of western Washington, unaffected by the fallout from the eruption. About 20 miles from the volcano, we spot the first dramatic evidence of the blast, a layer of ash blanketing the landscape, abruptly transforming it from green to gray. Then, 15 miles from the crater, we begin to fly over land that has had all the life blasted out of it. 150 square miles of timber once valued at $200 million. Trees 6 and 8 feet in diameter were pulled out of the ground, stripped of bark, branches, and leaves, and toppled like children's pickup sticks. The choppers search and circle as they travel. The 35-mile flight to the mountain slope takes almost 50 minutes. Finally, the helicopters locate today's search site, a mountain ridge just 3 miles north of the volcano's new crater. The pilots find stable patches of ground large enough to allow a safe landing. Deputy Hill and Hauser are first off the helicopter. They will lead the advance team of searchers. This party will go ahead to try and find the mining camp where the missing people lived and worked. Ducking to avoid the still spinning blades, the men move away from the copter and gather on a knoll. They then face their first big problem, simply finding out where they are.
This country is ruined so bad that the landmarks on the map and what you have out here is absolutely two different things.
The searchers set out and immediately encounter the problems of moving on the ground. Trees that look like tinder from the air turn out to be 6 to 10 foot high obstacles that must be scaled, scrambled over. What was once a magnificent forest has become an obstacle course of huge proportions. To qualify for this kind of rescue work, a man should be able to walk 30 miles a day. These men will walk 1.5 miles today. At the end, they'll be exhausted. Once, deer, bobcat, cougar, bear, and elk roamed this wilderness. Now there's no life within a 15-mile radius of the crater. The only movement is the search team. The only color, the gray ash. The only sound, the helicopter, which points the searchers in the right direction.
Right now, the search and rescue party has gotten far ahead of us. They're up on the side of the mountain now at the site of an old gold mine where they believe 3 people may have sought shelter right after the eruption.
The ash and muck is 4 feet deep in places, covered with a thin crust that breaks at the slightest touch. The ash itself covers 3 feet of snow on the mountain. When wet, the stuff pulls at the boots of the men. When they use a fallen log as a bridge to cross a ravine or as a stairway, the wet ash makes the surface slick and dangerous. Before the eruption, Elk Lake was a major landmark here. The force of the blast blew all of the water out of the lake and filled it with mud and debris. Elk Lake just doesn't exist anymore. The men are looking for a piece of mining equipment, a compressor they know must have been near the mine entrance.
Okay, we're approaching the compressor at the mine. Can you give us an approximate location of the cabin from the mine?
If they're in the right place, maybe, just maybe, someone may still be alive there.
Okay, there was a dead-end spur come out, and then they walked right off that spur into mines. We're right there.
We're within, like I say, you know, everything's covered in mud.
Oh, God. These guys are standing outside. They could be under 30, 40, 50 feet in mud.
Pick up the phone. The mine only goes in a short distance, but we got about 4 feet of ash out here on the ground.
Any chance we're inside?
Negative. Positive on that. We'll start working our way downstream towards you from this location.
Quickly, the searchers are convinced there's no one left at the mine. They move downhill looking for a likely place for a cabin, but it's getting late.
Okay, it's 4:45 now. We better start working up on that knob.
They're going to finish up there?
I hope so.
The weather is closing in. The men are getting anxious to get off the mountain, but they know the cabin is up here somewhere, and the missing people. The searchers and the dog houser come to a clearing just as the helicopters are being called in to pick up the search
I
party.
need the verification where they're going to pick us up, Grover. That's going to save us about a half-a-mile walk through this stuff. I think we just found the cabin. We'll get back to you in a minute.
Hauser is sent in first, encouraged by Deputy Hill.
Good boy.
The roof of the cabin is completely flattened. Not much left underneath.
That's a good boy.
That's scary.
Okay.
That's scary.
Yeah, I think we located one, Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, we got one victim here. Just a second before we contaminate, let them search some more.
A body has been located, and the professionals take over.
Seek 'em, house.
See, that's a good boy. That's a good boy.
Hauser's success is praised by his partner. He is urged to keep searching. The highly trained dog can smell a body even under the deep layer of ash.
Seek! Oh, good boy. That could be another victim right there.
Victim number 2, buried beneath a foot of suffocating volcanic ash.
Okay, one more. Let's go find. Good boy. Check and see if there's a victim right there. He identified there for a second.
You find something there?
Hauser continues to search as members of the rescue team look on.
See?
Within minutes, it is over. Victim number 3. The locations of all 3 bodies are marked for recovery later, after the oncoming bad weather clears. The searchers move slowly now, attaching red markers, the only color on the mountain. Helicopters arrive to retrieve the exhausted team members almost 4 hours after the mountain search began.
Let me ask you something.
Okay.
How's it feel now? You succeeded in a sense.
Well, yeah, we succeeded. It probably will benefit the family a whole lot, and was our major concern. That's the reason we were here today. The possibility of survivor in this area is, obviously, as you can see, is very, very doubtful.
This was the 12th trip since the eruption for these men. There are still 71 people missing. The rainfall gets heavier. They head for home to begin again tomorrow.
The Mount St. Helens volcano remained relatively quiet today. Steam clouds rose thousands of feet into the air, but there were no explosions. Stephen Geer, who's been watching the volcano from the days of its first eruption, took advantage of the lull to get another good look at the main crater.
Mount St. Helens used to rise above the clouds in snow-capped majesty. Now the volcano becomes blacker with every eruption. The clouds today topped off at 5,700 feet. Our ABC News helicopter climbed to the 8,400-foot level to the rim of the crater, where cameraman Charles Jones photographed the plume of steam that continues to rise from the mountain since last Thursday night's eruption. Although the heavy ashfall produced by that eruption has ceased, you can see that plumes of ash are still thrusting up from the crater. These photographs raise the question of whether a lava dome may be building in the crater, as reported, then denied by U.S. Geological Survey scientists late last month. We asked Dr. Tom Benson, a geologist at Portland State University, to examine today's videotape.
One of the things that's most interesting is the way the steam is venting in almost a circular pattern around what looks like broken up rock covered with ash. That's why it's the same color as the ash color you see out there on the outer rim of the inner crater. I think perhaps, or quite probably, highly probably, that there's a lava dome at very shallow depth. But we're not seeing true lava at the surface yet. We're seeing more broken rock.
How far below the surface do you think it might be?
I'm thinking we're talking in orders of tens of feet, tens of meters.
Now, if a lava dome builds, what significance would it have for the mountain?
It's perhaps a good way to look at it would be the start of the rebuilding process of the mountain. Remember, we're talking about a mountain that was 9,000 feet plus high, and it's been taken down quite a bit, and it should be a building mountain.
How long would it take this mountain to get back to 9,677
In
feet?
geological terms, overnight, but in human terms, quite a while, I think. We're talking about hundreds of years, certainly, or thousands of years.
Near what's left of Spirit Lake, these geologists are examining the new pyroclastic flow, the flow of molten ash from Thursday's eruption. If a lava dome is forming, it will eventually block further eruptions. Stephen Geer, ABC News, Mount St. Helens, Washington.
Despite the massive destruction unleashed by Mount St. Helens, life slowly returns to the area in the weeks following the Great Explosion. Animals feed on wild plants that survived the blast and are growing up through the volcanic ash. Geologists return to the mountain to monitor seismic activity and to monitor changes in the mountain's flanks that could warn of another eruption, one that, like the original Mount St. Helens explosion, might kill 2 million birds, fish, and animals, and flatten forests like so many matchsticks.
A year later, the scene is much the same, but a game of pickup sticks has begun. The Weyerhaeuser Company, which lost 68,000 of its nearly 500,000 acres of timber near the mountain, is salvaging some of the downed timber. Not all the fury of Mount St. Helens flew through the air. This wall of water, mud, volcanic debris, and logs roared down the Toutle River at 30 miles an hour. The floods that came with the mud flow enlarged the 200-foot-wide river to 1/3 of a mile. Now, a year later, it's difficult to realize that the Toutle River was once clear and beautiful, one of the finest fishing streams in the Northwest. The scars of the gigantic mud flow remain, and the waters are still gray with volcanic ash. Agricultural losses in Washington state totaled $55 million, but dire predictions of agricultural disaster did not come true. Here in the fertile Yakima Valley, the net result was beneficial. At David Hull's ranch, an alfalfa crop was covered with 3/4 of an inch of ash, but the ashfall did more good than harm.
Our small grain crops probably did the best they ever have. They were not headed out at the time, and the ash fell right through to the ground and held the moisture in and reflected the sun off of the ground and kept the ground cool, and they just did fantastic.
A year after the major eruption, the tourist business is booming.
We're anticipating about 3 million additional travelers to the Northwest because of the mountain.
Nearby Portland, Oregon is now promoting Mount St. Helens as a prime tourist attraction. Last summer, there was fear that ash falls would wreck the tourist trade. Volcanic mud flows no longer clog the Columbia River. $225 million has been spent in dredging and flood control operations since the eruption.
It will rank as one of the major pieces of emergency type work that the Corps of Engineers has ever been faced with.
The engineers have been building 2 flood control dams in the mud flows of the Toutle River below the volcano. Fortunately, this winter's snows were abnormally light, but a serious flood threat remains, and hundreds of homes could again be endangered. Helicopters are being used to fertilize areas where grass seed has been planted to prevent erosion. Restoring vegetation is a slow process along the river. On the mountain, it's even slower. It's going to be centuries before nature can restore this scene of death and devastation. But as you can see, the process has already begun. Continuation of that process depends on the volcano. How frequent and how violent will future eruptions be? Even the top government scientist at Mount St. Helens is not sure.
We could have further explosive eruptions here. We don't
really anticipate that there'll be anything of the size of the May 18th eruption, but even that can't be excluded completely.
That doubt exists, even though Mount St. Helens is now the most wired volcano in the world. Seismographs record every tremor, and on a ridge 5 miles from the crater, geologists have erected a virtual laboratory of volcanology, including a videotape camera and a laser instrument that probes the mountain's surface. The information gathered here gives geologists a good chance of predicting what may happen tomorrow, but predicting what may happen next month or next year is largely guesswork. However, the eruption of Mount St. Helens has been very useful as a reminder that the western United States is an area of explosive volcanoes.
Effectively, any of the Cascade volcanoes could erupt. All of them have erupted within the last few thousand years.
In the Cascade Range, there are a dozen active volcanoes. 5 erupted in the 19th century, 2 in this century up to now, Mount St. Helens and California's Mount Lassen, which erupted repeatedly from 1914 through 1917. Other Cascade volcanoes have produced warning signals. In 1975, Mount Baker belched jets of steam and sulfur. And while Mount St. Helens was still smoking last summer, its neighbor Mount Hood was shaking with a series of earthquakes.
I think that there are probably a dozen of the Cascade volcanoes that have the potential for erupting again in the future. Mount Hood is certainly one of them. You've mentioned Mount Baker already and Lassen. I think that Shasta and Rainier are also strong candidates. Whether they will erupt in our lifetimes or our children's lifetimes, we can't be sure.
And uncertainty still hangs over Mount St. Helens. When you stand here on the side of the volcano 3 miles from the crater and consider the awesome force that blew away the top and the north face of the mountain, and when you consider that no one was able to predict an eruption of that magnitude, then it's easy to understand that precise predictions of the volcano's future activity are impossible.